welcome to another watch list, my weekly rundown of what I've been watching and what I've been up to. This week, I thought I'd go for the world record of world cinema. Looking at the films that I've watched recently and what I've been up to, I kind of seen that I kind of bounced all over the place for the slot. So strap in, we're hitting many of the continents that there are in the world, but I thought we'd start with something a bit closer to home and talk about a Polish war film. And specifically that Polish war film is Katyn by Andrzej Wajda. Now, this is the artificial eye release of a film that is from 2007, like I say, Polish. And Andrzej Wajda talks about it in the extras, but this was a film that he wanted to make, both about his nationality, but also about his mother and his father. So his father went off to fight in the war, and his mother was left at home, and he kind of says that he didn't know who to make the film about, so he ended up making the film about both of them, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely outstanding. It basically centres around this massacre that happened in real life in Katyn, where there were people just murdered and slaughtered by their hundreds and thousands, etc. It's just a massive massacre. And in one of those stories of, you know, the victor always writes history, Katyn, or Poland, kind of passed through hands of being under German control and then being under Russian control. Both parties blame the other when they're in control of controlling the message of who was responsible for this massacre. And that's essentially what the film is basically telling the story around, but it looks at all of the bits that sit outside that. So the people that were involved in the war, the people that were left at home and looking after, the people that were basically there to hold everything together while war was happening. And it's just another one of these World War II made, you know, dramas about a real life event that is quite harrowing in places, deeply affecting in other ones, but when you put it in the hands of a filmmaker like Wajda, then you get something that's particularly great. And definitely part of that cream of the crop kind of stuff that you'll see. Another artificial eye release that highlights a recent European cinema great, or world cinema great, and this one's no different. It also has a couple of great extras. Now, there's a making of documentary of the thing itself, but there's also a rather extensive interview with Andrzej Wajda, and given that he died in 2016, and this would have been quite, you know, in the tail end of his career that this was done, it's particularly insightful and really lovely to hear about his personal motivations and everything, and his personal relationships that went into the making of this film. An absolute stunner of a movie, and one I'm very glad to have watched, even though it was a while ago. I rented it, but then had to pick up because I got, as usual for Artificial Eye, got a few pounds for this release and to watch. It's a great one to start off with. Next up is a film that's due out in a week or so from when this goes up, from Eureka Montage Pictures. Now, Montage Pictures, the Eureka line, is a lot of modern world cinema, and it kind of floats between things that are quite heavy or dense, and then some stuff that's maybe a bit more digestible or easy to watch. And like something like the Bird would have been, you know, quite heavy to watch. Even something more recently like Breeder, which was, you know, tough to watch for different reasons. And we have now Running with the Wind, which is an Ethiopian film. And it tells the story of basically two boys who grew up together in a very, you know, rural part of Ethiopia. And they both have independent dreams that centre around a chance meeting with a photographer or a person who takes the two boys to Addis Ababa, and they experience life there. He, being a photographer, inspires one of the young men, which is Solomon, to become a photographer. In fact, so much that he steals a camera and then sets about making this his quest and his dream. And then young Abdi wants to take after one of the greatest exports probably from Ethiopia, which is Haile Gebrselassie, who was a world-class distance runner, and Abdi wants to be the world-class distance runner. Now, after a while, these two boys become separated through some life events and the circumstance, etc., and they don't see each other, but they both pursue their dream independently from each other. And the next part of the film talks about them pursuing each of their dreams individually. You know, Abdi doing it in, you know, a style that that is a bit more affluent. They both came from rural Ethiopia and kind of grew up very poor. But Abdi, because of his sporting prowess, gets brought into a situation where they're looking for the next elite athlete. They're looking for the next Gebre Selassie. And he also makes an appearance in the film, by the way. And Solomon lives in the streets of Addis Ababa in very poor conditions, although he has become a father and a husband at that time. And he's haunted by some of the relationships of people that are around him. And Abdi is similarly supported or haunted by the relationships that he has around him. And really the next part of the story is about bringing the two of those people together and how they, and if they fulfill their dreams, or whether it ends up happily ever after. It's a quite interesting movie. I think it kind of is a bit overlong because it does these 3 sections of life and kind of draws it out. But it is something that is quite an easy watch, I think, overall. I think the two boys acted quite well. Solomon has more natural depth as character to explore than Abdi, but a quite interesting release, and like I say, due out in Montage Pictures, which usually, you know, not that expensive a pickup, but maybe one to rent to see or rent online on the video on demand platform of choice, especially if you're not really collecting the Montage Pictures, which I don't see many people actually doing, but an interesting release nonetheless. Next up is a documentary. Now, this is on Dogwoof at the moment, but I didn't watch it on Dogwoof. If you're lucky enough to be in the UK or have access to a good VPN of choice, BBC iPlayer will have access to these, but there's a long... Anybody that's grew up in Britain as long as I have will know that Storyville, used to be in BBC 2 but now seems to be in BBC 4, is a place where they showcase a documentary film. You know, some of them are commissioned by the BBC or by small filmmakers and they're bought by, and then other ones are bought in from the outside looking in. And this one is a Romanian documentary that tells the story of what happened when there was a fire in a clubhouse or in a venue, and lots of people were rushed to hospital with their severe burn injuries. And unbelievably, it wasn't the burn injuries that killed them, it was what happened to them when they got into hospital. Now, that's where the film starts, and that's what the film explores, basically how, you know, the Romanian health system was so abject and corrupt that the things that they did and the shortcuts that they took in service of making money out of healthcare are just absolutely shocking. I mean, the amount of times that there was a revelation in this documentary and you just, I mean, I shouted out at the TV for sake. Honestly, just absolutely unbelievable the lengths that people went to. And what makes the documentary so compelling and so rich is that we actually get full access to everything that's happening. This started because of an investigative journalist really looking into and keeping on digging and not taking no for an answer as to the depths that these things go to, both in terms of what was happening and the people and the individuals were involved. And on the far end, we get access to who was the new health minister at the time, and he lets you inside all the meetings and the discussions that were happening at the time. They film it and they chronicle it very clearly. Now, he's obviously got his own reasons for doing it at the time, but what you get is an incredibly warts and all documentary that nearly, because of the access that you're given, feels unbelievable. It feels like it couldn't have happened given how we were in the room when all of this was happening. It's utterly incredible. It honestly shocked me throughout. And when you consider that we've just come out of a pandemic and there were questionable decisions maybe about healthcare and what things that happened there, it doesn't half make you think about why there has to be an accountability and why proper investigative journalism is so important to a functioning society. It's an absolutely incredible documentary and film, and one that if you're in the BBC, look out for Storyville, look for Collectiv, which is the name of the club where the fire took place, and watch it there. And if not, like I say, there's a Dogwoof release. We'll leave that in for you to catch up and watch. Just utterly, incredibly compelling documentary filmmaking. Next up we go to Brazil, and we talk about a release from a company that, again, I don't think I've ever talked about on the watch list before, and it is Mubi. And it's their film of, or their release of the film Bacarau, which is here, which is a pretty vanilla Blu-ray release of a film, you know, that tells the story of a small village in Brazil. Now, these releases, if you're lucky enough, most of them, when I go to look at my local H&B, they all still have their slipcovers, etc. They are nice quality slipcover. If anybody's a slipcover fan, and I know that many people are, these are probably the prettiest and nicest that there are. They have this consistent lining up of the spine, etc. on the side. Very beautiful, but like I say, no other extras on this. And I know Kino have a release of this, and it seems to be very fully featured. So as maybe get into, you know, release more of these, and there seems to be a big slate that's sort of coming. First Cows coming this year in a few weeks from Kelly Reichardt. We get some audio tracks, some alternative mixes, etc. But this was a jury prize winner at Cannes, and like I say, it tells the story of a small village and the people that are in there. And the first part of the film centres on the characters and the people that are within Bacarau, that live there, about what looks to be very poor. And we have some interesting characters. The thing starts with a wake or a funeral for who would be the matriarch of the village, Carmelita, and how some people react to that in different ways. Some people celebrate her life, and some people are chastising her on her deathbed, so to speak, or in her death. And then the film moves on to basically show some of the weirdness that's starting to happen. It disappears off Google Maps. It seems to be non-existent, and then people in and around the village start being killed, massacred in fact. And we are introduced to maybe some other characters that are playing a part in what's going on. And there's this mystery of what's happening here, why here. It seems very remote. And one of the really interesting parts of the film is that there's like a never-ending supply of new characters, or depth of new characters. We keep on getting fed tidbits about, you know, somebody's past. Some people have a nickname that seems to have certain connotations. There's a new character brought in for an election. Everybody seems to have layers and depths in here, and people's motivations are always in question as to who's the good guys, who's the bad guys. Thrown into all this, kind of out of setting in a very, you know, what is very poor, like I say, village setting. There seems to be this technology. There's these drones that look like UFOs flying around the place that are, you know, it just doesn't seem to fit. The whole story doesn't seem to fit. And like I say, new characters keep on getting introduced, new motivations and new sides of characters keep on getting revealed throughout the 2 or 10 minutes of runtime that there is of this film. And what you get in the last 20-25 minutes, or half an hour maybe even, is this incredibly tense final scene that I think is really gripping. The bits before that, it feels a bit like thematically dissonant, and what I mean by that is that you're not really sure what type of movie it is. You know, is it an exploration of family life in a village, you know, of living remote and access to things like medicine and foods? Is it a social construct, so looking at different levels of social, you know, existence within a society? Or is it an action movie? Or you're not quite sure, and that kind of lost me a little bit in the middle. But like I say, the last half an hour pulls it all together, and you get what is a very tense and somewhat satisfying end to it. I really enjoyed it. It's something that I would probably like to give to somebody else to see and talk about. I know my good friend film blogger Sam was speaking about one of the alternative releases from this filmmaker that picked up, and he said he was a fan of Bacarau, which happened to be in my player at the time when I was watching his video, so I know he's a fan. So it's the kind of film that, you know, it'd be nice to dig into in some more depth with other people that have seen it. But yeah, an interesting release, and like I say, these movie releases, you know, I think are overpriced when they're first released, but most of them I can get for around £10 now, and I have a couple of them in my collection, and I'm going to keep on shipping away, because like I say, access to modern world cinema isn't always quite as forthcoming as it may initially appear. So that's Bacarau. And last this week is a film from Italia. Yeah, one of what would be considered the great classics of European cinema. and that is Luchino Visconti's The Leopard. Now, I rented The Leopard because it seems like the kind of film that will get a really nice deluxe edition over here. We've only had a BFI release here that was, you know, not very much on the release, so it's due for something that's, you know, a bit more pleasant release, so I'm not going to chip out for it at the moment because there'll be one coming. But this is an epic piece of filmmaking that talks about, again, some of the same themes that have been coming up a lot, both in the French cinema season and here. And these feelings around the change of the 20th century, the turn of the 20th century, with the change from the aristocracy to, you know, wealth being the determiner of position in society. And we have Burt Lancaster as a prince in an Italian region, and he and his family live in very grand circumstances, but he can feel a change in the wind. He can feel a change in circumstances all around the place, and he can feel that his time, or the aristocracy's time, is coming to an end. So much so that there's revolt in and around that time of Garibaldi, who is looking to seize control, and we have Alain Delon play his nephew, who gets involved in this revolutionary action, and he wants to go his own direction, and the prince sees that as the future. All the while, he has his own family, and we have this old style system of people getting married off and creating new relationships that are sort of, you know, hinted at, they're sort of inbred, you know, between that aristocracy that I think is pretty clear of what happened in Europe right up in the modern days, of the people of a certain aristocracy only meet people from within their own circle, etc. And that's just the way that it's always been. And you get this very sweeping arc right the way through of a character who you really quite like in Burt Lancaster's Prince. But he is a man with flaws. He's a man that has vices and things that, you know, seem to be sort of accepted and that explains away. But it means that you know that he's not completely moral. He hasn't got the complete moral high ground. And in the side of all this, there is this other character that comes into it, which is Claudia, played by Claudia Cardinal, who's the neighbour's daughter who's been hidden away otherwise, and she comes in and she's a great beauty. She walks in the room and all the male heads turn, and she is captivated, or she captivates everybody else in the room. It's a really beautiful piece, and it ends the film, maybe the last hour, with this ballroom piece as you know, the change of the winds kind of come together. And I wouldn't say there's a grand finish. I think that's one of the things that I thought was going to happen. I thought it was really going to build up to something, but it doesn't. And on reflection, I think the film ends on the note that it set it to end on. So basically saying how this was all happening. I think The Leopard is incredible. It is the kind of thing that I'm going to try and search out the Criterion disc for, because this film needs discussed and talked about in a lot more detail, and it needs explored. It's the kind of film that I would like to read about that time period, for instance, because it does seem to be quite interesting at that time. And those are my 5 films this week, all within the realms of, you know, world cinema around the place, with different releases here, there, and elsewhere. And I hope you get plenty to inspire or to talk about, or even to investigate with your own collection, because some of you may have seen some of these releases yourself. So thanks very much for watching, and if you've made this far, I'd like to thank you for watching and your support so far, and take care, and I'll speak to you soon.